Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this breakout session number 2, where we're going to be focusing on how we can harness opportunities in Southeast Asia's digital transformation. It's a distinct pleasure for me today to have such a distinguished panel of speakers with us. This is going to be a discussion panel, so therefore no slides. Talking points are all going to be live. We feel free to chip in anytime. I do have a set of questions that I want to put to the panelists, but you know my style in terms of presentation. I like to interrupt. I like to sort of probe, challenge, ask questions, and I'm sure the other panelists would also be equally disruptive. So let's start with that theme. And the focus, as some of you may have seen earlier, is on looking at the past, the present, and the future. Crystal ball gazing, as we say, into the future, but also, and because we have people here from organizations who are involved in helping companies in their digital transformation journey. We have a lawyer who looks at it from a regulatory standpoint, and we have very senior individuals who are looking at digitalization within their organizations. We hope that we also get a chance to share with you real-life examples of the challenges in digitalization across Southeast Asia. So with that said, let me start with a round of introductions of the various speakers. And I'm just going to follow the flow as you see on screen here. So starting first with Royce. Royce is Director and Head of Global Public Policy at the Alibaba Group. I know him as one of the most prolific LinkedIn posters that I've seen, but not just a question of quantity, but also quality, in the sense that when he shares his views on various public policy matters, it's of particular interest to me. So I tend to click like, share, etc. So very, very interesting insights. And I hope he's bringing some of that with him today for the presentation also. His areas of focus includes international developments in data protection, policy, laws and regulations. And he speaks with a high degree of authority there simply because he himself has been in practice in-house counsel and oversaw policy, Infocom policy at IMDA, our Infocom Media Development Authority in Singapore. And all this before joining Alibaba Group. He was also Director for Economic Regulations at the Ministry of Communications and Information, where he was then able to see the transition between the legal to the policy, and then from the policy being able to apply the policy issues now as Head of Global Policy at Alibaba. So we have Royce with us on the panel. And next to Royce, you will see Aisha Khanna, who is co-founder and CEO of Ado AI. Thank you, Aisha, for being here. Again, someone who, when I was told is going to be on the panel, I was like, wow, how do we get her? Simply because if you know Aisha's background in terms of the way in which she's helping organizations, large multinational organizations, as well as some of the startups in the industry to deal with this issue of digital transformation, it shows an understanding of macro issues as well as micro issues. And she helps companies, in particular in the area of artificial intelligence solutions, both for existing firms as well as from an incubator standpoint. So she's seen the pain points that all of us are trying hard to deal with on a daily basis. On the writing front, she's co-author of Hybrid Reality, Thriving in the Emerging Human Technology Civilization. Both Aisha and her organization has been featured on various publications such as Forbes to share how change can be achieved in Asia and in a sense led from Asia and having global palpable impact. And that ability also led her to serve on the board of Infocom Media Development Authority in Singapore, on the board itself. And that is a recognition of the policy understanding and the application, hands-on skills that she has in this area. So we have Aisha as well on the panel with us. And next, below, you see Chikin and Logan. Let me start first with Lam Chikin, someone who I know very well, who was previously a colleague with me at Raja and Tan also for a fleeting period of time, seems like a generation ago now. Since then, Chikin's moved on. He's now Director and Head Legal, Compliance and Secretariat at DBS Group. And under that, or with that wind in his sail, as it were, he's now accountable for the team and manages legal and regulatory risks of DBS across legal entities, segments, and geographies. Is that last point on geography in particular that I want to pick on? While Chikin is a lawyer by profession, he's deep knowledge of the impact of technology on banking, on finance, And the impact of technology generally on the law itself is what distinguishes him from many other people that I know. And again, we hope that he will bring to bear some of that experience to sort of share the pain points, challenges that were there in DBS. I'll be asking him some questions on, is DBS a digital bank already, or is there more that needs to be done, things along those lines. And then let's see where that discussion takes us. And then rounding up the group is Logan. Logan is a fellow partner, Raja & Tan Asia. He's from Raja & Tan LCT, which is our office in Vietnam. And Logan and I work very closely with many clients on regional data protection, technology-related matters. And all of this gives us the ability to share with you, some of the pain points that exist in our industry today. And that leads me very nicely now to a very quick introduction, if I may, a deeper dive into what exactly this panel is going to be discussing. And I'm just going to be bullet pointing issues before I turn over to my individual panelists for their views. When we want to discuss the issue of digitalization and digital transformation, it's not about the tech in isolation. The technology clearly is an enabler, but often it's the human and societal aspects of the changes that we need and that we see that must be addressed. And that often is not addressed enough. So we hope to cover some of those areas today. So in that sense, technology is a key part of that transformation, but we view it as a set of tools, a form of necessity, perhaps a catalyst for the transformation that needs to be done, but not the be all and end all. And that insight or that perspective is important from a regulatory standpoint as well, where often people tend to focus on the technology risk issues. And so the regulatory framework looks at technology risk rather than enabling transformation, which is really what this is all about. And when you look at enabling transformation, it means expanding your perspective from just saying, how can we bring this technology in and deal with technology risk issues, but ask, how can I help a specific technology, a specific industry to pivot from where they are today to a digitalized workflow, to a digitalized way of servicing their clients and internally themselves. Those are the true pain points that need to be addressed. And there, on that note, I'm just going to end on a few key points. 5 areas from a macro issue perspective, 5 areas which are specific, which will govern the discussion for the panel today as well. From a macro standpoint, what we need to see in the region are the following. Number 1, policy clarity. And that's incumbent on the government and NGOs to have the wherewithal to do the necessary thinking to bring that policy clarity. With the policy clarity, the second area is regulatory certainty. And that's where you need to translate those policy imperatives into laws and regulations. And laws and regulations which are not drafted in isolation or in a closed committee, but in consultation with the industry. Third is technical standards. Many of these new technologies and digital transformation inevitably requires the deployment of technology. And without standards, the technology will bifurcate, will disintegrate, and the fragmentation that results will cause more harm and more pain and potentially much more lag than if there was a harmonized way in which the technology can be deployed across the region. And moving on, 2 other points would be operational risk management. And here again, the issue being fragmentation. How do you deal with the issue of fragmentation? And from a private sector standpoint, which is, I hope of interest to all of you, the commercial strategy. At the end of the day, looking at certainty in terms of the law is often, in many parts of the region around us, more of a wishful thinking than actuality. So there may not be that guidance. Now, in the lack of, or in an environment where there is no guidance, or there may be guidance that seem to state positions in an extreme sense, like data localization challenges that some countries are having. How do we deal with that? It will require us to look at a commercial strategy. So that's the 5th point. So policy clarity, regulatory certainty, technical standards, operational risk management, and commercial strategies. In a nutshell, are things that we need to look at concretely having in place to enable true digital transformation. But what should these 5 areas cover? And again, in a nutshell, some of the core areas that we'll be covering in the next few minutes would be some of the pain points that the speakers before, starting with Minister Chan himself, had outlined as well in the challenges in terms of digitalization. So you'll notice that the panels that Parag had chaired touched on areas such as cybersecurity and data protection, intangible assets, digital intellectual property approaches that need to be adopted, data governance, analytics, artificial intelligence, data localization, and data sharing challenges? How are those to be addressed? Remember, these are not pure play data protection issues. Some of them are. Data sharing, for example, yes. But areas like data analytics requires us to go into other areas like artificial intelligence ethics, responsible AI, transparency and explainability in artificial intelligence. What and how should these things be done? And then, of course, in the trade space and e-commerce, the challenges in terms of the trade agreements that currently exist multilaterally simply don't make sense. And so many countries, including Singapore, have started on the road of putting in place digital trade agreements. Would that perhaps be a means through which we can reach some degree of a harmonized approach in the region? And then finally, taxation. I leave tax last because I don't understand tax. If I did tax law, maybe I would have retired 5-10 years earlier. But I have a lot of respect for my colleagues who do. But it's undoubtedly an area where there has to be some significant thought. I think we've all seen what happened at G20 and others. There were a lot of other imperative issues that were put ahead of taxation, but it still is an open issue that must be resolved. How are we going to deal with taxation cross-border? How do we deal with the tax planning that organizations need to do? So those are some of the areas that, substantive areas that need to be addressed. But again, it would be remiss of me if I just jumped into those issues without talking about the depth of knowledge that the panelists are going to bring. Well, I have outlined really areas, pain points that many of us are facing today in digitalization. What the panelists will bring to bear is their own experience in terms of handling some of the challenges themselves, and how they've rolled these solutions out across multiple jurisdictions in some cases, and the pain points that they've faced. So all of this is, really what we hope to hear from the panelists. And I start first with Royce. Royce, thanks again for making the time. Really appreciate it. We know your busy schedule. I have no idea how you're able to do the work that you do and still have the time to spend that much time and energy on social media and responding to questions and all the rest. So thanks again. With that context, what we know of the work that you do, the organization that you come from, what Alibaba does, in terms of its successes, obviously, in your home market, and now establishing itself as a major e-commerce force in Southeast Asia, there undoubtedly would have been challenges that you would have seen in that journey, particularly in e-commerce, and now growing into other areas like cloud computing, digital payments. There are a multitude of regulatory frameworks that you would have had to address. How do you think that your experience in Southeast Asia has, in a sense, given you that degree of clarity? And would there be tips that you could share with other organizations that are looking on perhaps on a smaller scale, but walking that same walk that you have had to do?
Thanks so much, Rajesh, for your exceedingly kind words. I'm not sure whether, when I heard those descriptors, I'm not quite sure whether you're describing me or a fellow panelist or panelist.
Yes, you.
With that over, maybe I think it's useful for me to perhaps start off with a very quick introduction on Alibaba, because that will help to add some context and help to frame a lot of my sharing, as well as some of my comments that will follow. So first off, I think our mission in Alibaba has always been to make it easy to do business anywhere. To us, this is a timeless mission, and it's not something that we just use as an empty label, but it's really our North Star that really guides all of our thinking and all of our actions in any part of the world. And in that light, we really see our role primarily as one that is facilitative and enabling. So as you know, we operate in different corners of the globe. We are involved in e-commerce. We've also branched out into other lines, such as cloud computing, digital payments, digital media, entertainment. We also have innovation facilities such as R&D. But we really bring together all these diverse businesses as part and parcel of that overarching mission that I shared. It's really about making it easy for our customers to meet, to work, to carry out transactions, and even to live within the Alibaba ecosystem. So we provide the technology, the infrastructure, the marketing reach, the payment solutions, logistics management to make it easy for businesses, especially SMEs, to use technology to then engage with the customers, not just within the country itself, but also across borders, to carry out trade, to close their transactions in a more secure and efficient way. The other side of the coin really is that we then help our customers to then widen their choices and find the most suitable products and services that meet their needs in a safe and a value for money manner. So I like to think of ourselves as an ecosystem of connected or related businesses to make life easier or better for both our merchants as well as our customers. Going now into, let's say, the challenges that we faced, let's say just 2 to 3 years ago in Southeast Asia, which really sounds like a lifetime ago, because much has changed within this short span of time. When Alibaba first came to the Southeast Asia region, a number of issues immediately sprang up. One is the need to strengthen the basic infrastructure facilities, including for warehousing, storage, the need for more data centers, more transport and delivery options that are reliable, that are safe. We also face the issue of a fragmented online payment landscape. And of course, within Southeast Asia itself, we have diverse languages, norms, cultures, different levels of developmental needs, different expectations of the stakeholders in the different countries. And really, Southeast Asia or ASEAN, one view that we would like to talk about really is that, are we one unified region, or is it more accurate to say that we are 10 separate jurisdictions that is trying to come together and coalesce more closely together? So that in itself presents quite a big challenge to Alibaba, wanting to operate and grow within ASEAN. Another point is really about how do we find the right local talent with the needed skill sets, and perhaps more importantly, with the right mindset. And how do we then build a coherent and integrated regional ecosystem of related businesses, starting from supply chains to data analytics to payment, all the way to delivery and order fulfillment. But I would say that the greatest challenge that we faced in Southeast Asia was probably one of mindset. I think just a short time ago, digitalization will be seen to be something that's good to have, something that's optional. And in certain quarters, I would say that the sense of inertia or pushback might be strong because we run up against vested ways of operating and incumbency. But COVID-19 really has helped to change this significantly. I think amidst all the misery that it has wrought, one little bright spot of COVID-19, and of course not to trivialize all the suffering, one little bright spot is that it has helped a lot of businesses to see that digitalization is not merely good to have, but it's now seen as a basic necessity and a survival strategy for them. It has provided a way out or an outlet for many businesses to continue to operate and continue to serve customers. And similarly, consumers of different backgrounds and demographic groups, we've seen that they've also benefited from purchasing via e-commerce. They have also experienced a sustained period. COVID has been with us for more than a year now. So where new behaviors and new lifestyles are repeated long enough and hopefully to form lasting habits. On investments in Southeast Asia's local e-commerce companies such as Lazada really have ticked a lot of the right boxes for us, including for logistics, technology, payments, access to networks of customers and partners, which have complemented Alibaba's incumbent capabilities. So such investments really serve as a beachhead, as a catalyst for growth in Southeast Asia. But some of these challenges, I think they still exist. Some are structural in nature, some are perennial in nature, and also new ones have come up, because as with any good solutions, they themselves tend to lead to new problems, right? Especially as circumstances and needs constantly evolve and change. And I'm happy to share more of that later.
Thanks for that, Royce. And you touched on 1 or 2 points in particular, which are of interest. First, the human factor, right? Which I think you'll see a fair bit of disparity between the jurisdictions. And the other one perhaps is logistics and logistics challenges. The third, of course, which you didn't quite touch on, but would be of particular interest, is some of the data transfer challenges that you may have seen between the different jurisdictions with the work that you do. Would you like to comment on any of those a bit deeper?
Sure. Of course, I think one challenge has always been the differences in the laws and regulations within ASEAN. I touched very briefly on the differences in cultural norms, in values, in needs and expectations. And a lot of these are then translated into different laws and standards in the different countries within ASEAN. I think Singapore, from Alibaba's perspective, has always been a very attractive regional headquarters, or if not an international business headquarters for us, for a number of reasons. And one of the key reasons is actually our data regulation philosophy and our regulatory framework. A bit of conflict of interest here because I was involved in the review of the PDPA in the previous lifetime. So So something that really drew Alibaba to Singapore is the fact that we do have standards for protection, but at the same time, the government also realizes that we don't protect data for the sake of protecting data. Because after all, the saying goes that the safest way to protect data is simply not to use the data, right? But then that would be self-defeating in nature. So we do need a balance. We do need to keep in mind that we protect data for the purpose of using the data with responsibility, in a safe manner, with trust, so that businesses are able to then innovate using the data, come up with better goods and solutions, more personalized, more customized products or services that better meet or even anticipate the needs of our customers. So I think that is a very important draw for us. And due to the nature of data, it has to flow in order for the data to realize its potential. And there is one area of concern for us when it comes to the differing standards within Asean. And we can only hope that one day we do have a unified, coherent regulatory approach within Asean. But I think that will take time to develop. But in the meantime, I do recognize that Singapore's regulatory agencies, they have worked hard, including at the ASEAN level, to try to set certain norms and standards. The latest being the MCCs, the model contractual clauses, to try to add greater legal and regulatory certainty to how companies can use such clauses that can also be customized depending on the negotiations of the counterparties that meet their needs to allow the data to flow subject to the minimum requirements of security and trust.
Thanks, Royce. In particular, well worth raising the point about the model contractual clauses. It's something that I certainly believe a lot more focus should be given over the next few months and years ahead. Hopefully, we'll get that sorted soon between the different jurisdictions. Chee Kin, there's lots been said, and we had the pleasure of also having Mr. Piyush Gupta earlier sharing the DBS journey. And following on from that, because he did say that you're going to be sharing a lot more details about how DBS has achieved what it has today. I'm paraphrasing. But in particular, he did say, or rather about the journey of DBS into a digital bank. But my question to you is, would you say that DBS has arrived as a digital bank, or is there still a lot more? And if so, what more needs to be done to truly become digital in the region for DBS?
Yeah, thanks for having me here, and thanks for starting with a loaded question. Yeah, so I don't think it's a definition. And sure, I mean, I understand awards and all that kind of stuff, but I think it's quite important to maybe define what DBS sees to be its digital journey and what we measure ourselves against in order to make sure that we're hitting the definition. So as is often said, you don't just launch a nice digital banking product and suddenly claim your digital credentials to be complete. And I think it's quite important to take a little bit of a step back. I'm going to allude to, in a sense, what Royce said, and you've seen what Alibaba has been trying to do in terms of serving their customer. And that's probably the root of what the tech companies have been doing recently in terms of serving their customer, identifying pain points, and creating a bundle of products and services, capabilities, suites, and then the infrastructure to achieve what they need to achieve. And that then logically introduces the question of, well, then how do these customers pay for it, right? So as we think about the evolution of tech company strategy from the perspective of their underlying business and then the adjacency into financial services, it is extremely logical for financial services to then think about the adjacencies into the customer journeys, right? So it's very trite, but nobody wakes up in the morning saying, I'm going to buy the best mortgage in the world today, right? They go out and they say, I want to buy a house. And so the question for financial services is, how do we meet the customers at that point of need? And that's the thing that drives DBS along, right? So it sounds pretty trite, but we've reduced this into a fairly public strategy. We've gone very, very broad in terms of communicating that we want to do fundamentally three things, right? We want to use the best infrastructure in the world. We want to learn from the best, whether it is cloud, whether it's next generation analytics capability, whether it's connecting via APIs rather than system integration, and so on, right? So we want to run the best infrastructure in the world. Secondly, we want to be manic obsessive about the customer journey, and we want to embed ourselves into the customer journey. Just now, the illustration about the mortgage. And third, we want a culture of a startup, right? And the startup culture is, incredible entrepreneurialism, the willingness to try something, the willingness to be bold and to make moves that are ambitious. And I think these three things embody the way that DBS looks at our own digital journey. And so we will never, I think, say that suddenly we're the Development Bank of Singapore becoming the Digital Bank of Singapore. I think that's
that was my line.
Slowly,
Anyway.
slowly want to, move along this journey. So I think that's probably the best way to answer the question as this focus, a strategic focus on infrastructure, on the customer journey, and on our culture.
Okay. So thanks for that, Chicken. But in the light of the fact that you said that you accept also that this is a journey, so there's still a ways to go for all of us. With the regulators, central banks of issuing these digital banking licenses, it's caused a little bit of confusion in the marketplace as well as to, so you have digital banks and then you have traditional banks. And I think that's it's an artificial construct clearly. But could you shed some light on how are we supposed to view that? Especially with DBS, sort of trailblazing the change.
Yeah. Honestly, I can't speak for the regulator, but honestly, I think from the perspective of, let's say, competition, or from, let's say, of perspective of being able to serve segments of society that may be underserved today, if somebody can come up with something that is, in a sense, a differentiated offering, I think there's quite a lot of data, around the saturation of banking in Singapore.
Yeah.
But I would also say there is still some data around, let's say, SME loan availability, that kind of stuff, or specific segments of the population that may be better served. And I think that's the question that the regulators in offering digital banking licenses are trying to get to a more precise answer to. I think the truth of it is that every, incumbent bank, I wouldn't even call it traditional, because actually, frankly, every bank is undergoing their own version of transformation.
Yeah.
So I think every incumbent bank is going to look at the competitive landscape that's evolved with these new digital banking licenses. And I think, fair play, competition all around. And actually, if a competitor can come about and carve out an offering, a differentiated offering, and serve a segment better, the system will be better off as a result of that.
Yeah. It says a lot. I mean, for the regulator to take that stance, in most cases, you would find that the position taken would be, well, let's help the existing chaps digitalize. But here, it's a different approach in the sense that, yes, the existing players will have to digitalize, but let's also look at this new breed of players. And we see that happening in the legal sector as well, with alternative legal service providers coming into play, with legal tech companies coming into play, and our Ministry of Law and the judiciary embracing that and saying, here's another column in legal sector that we should support. And that's the approach that law firms should take as well. We don't see this necessarily as competition. We see it as an expansion, a validation of our business model. And so that will be the right spirit to approach. And we expect the same thing to be done in many other sectors as well, not just in banking or in law. Thanks for that, Chicken. And I'll come back to you again shortly because I still haven't asked the hard questions I wanted to. Let's see if we have time. Logan, I wanted to move on to you now because the challenge of looking at this and not wanting to be too Singapore-centric, there's always this concern about, in many of these talks, that we just talk about Singapore so much, and it's not about Singapore. We are fortunate to be where we are, undoubtedly, but there is so much interesting work happening in the region, and where you are, in Indochina, particularly in Vietnam, there's a lot of interest in digital transformation as well. In fact, many of the foundational businesses are based in Vietnam. So share with us a little bit more about your views, your experiences, the challenges and opportunities, and in particular, some of what we're hearing rather troublingly, if I may be blunt, about the issues with regard to data localization and what are companies trying to do to work around these regulatory constructs coming from other countries in the region.
Sure. Thanks, Rajesh. No, you're right. In Vietnam, and I suppose similar could be said for its neighboring countries in the region. I think digitalization initiatives have definitely been accelerating. I've been here for nearly 7 years. I think almost 8 years actually, and I've actually witnessed firsthand that drive towards the transformation from businesses, from the governments, and from the community in general. Right? So the changes are definitely there. And when we talk about opportunities, we can talk about things like consumption trends, increasing internet mobile penetration, more e-commerce engagement, those types of things. The statistics you see on the news. I'm not going to talk about that so much. But I think although this uptake is important, these opportunities can really only exist when there are policies in place from the governments that drive them. And countries in Vietnam and even Cambodia, right? I mean, they have created a backbone, a master plan or roadmap to set that foundation for policy making, right? For the purpose of digital transformation. For Cambodia, actually, my colleagues actually just shared with me over there. Just last month, the government passed their 15-year digital policy framework towards achieving that digital transformation. Now, for Vietnam, where I am, they made a bit more advancement. They've recently passed laws that foster investments in things like the startup ecosystem. Right, so if you're in innovative startup, if you're an R&D center, incubator, or even co-working space, right, the government has legislated that you could be eligible for investment incentives, and even beyond in investments. Right, the government they've been developing, they have developed infrastructure and hubs for companies to innovate. Right, if we're talking about blockchain, we're talking about digital currencies. Regulations are being developed. Even for deep tech, AI. My co-panelists might be probably better place to speak on that, but then they're also developing legislation in that field as well. So there's a lot of exciting things happening. In Vietnam, we're talking about opportunities. But I think I'm not just here to talk about how sunny and great the countries. I know that everything it's fantastic. You should come here because I think to be frank, there are challenges like you do mention. Right, and I'll speak a bit from the experience from the work that I've done in Vietnam, which is really on the policy side of things. And I think this is probably something that's not just shared in Vietnam, I think, but also in the rest of the Indochina region as well. I think with varying degrees, and that challenge is actually there's always this gap or mismatch between, I think, on the one side, those grand digitalization goals, right, that the government is trying to achieve. But then on the other side, the actual status of the country's legal framework, right, there's that gap that's always there. And I think there's two things that really cause this. Right, the first is the law cannot really evolve fast enough to catch up with the speed of digitalization. Right. You cannot make laws overnight. For those who want to capitalize on the opportunities, depending on what you do, depending on your risk appetite, it could be that some degree of patience is needed. Right? And I'll give you an example. I think for Vietnam, the country has potential, for fintech, right? A lot of transactions are still cash based. Internet penetration is rising, populations, still unbanked to quite a significant extent. But for those who want to go into areas like digital banking, mobile payments, unfortunately, I think Vietnam does not yet have a very well-defined legal framework for it. Right? And I think just this month, I was talking with someone who wanted to bring in the buy now, pay later model into Vietnam. But the challenge was seeing how that type of model could be introduced in the country when there was no regulatory framework that really catered for it. Right? So for those who do look for opportunities in the China region, right, regardless of the upside potential, regardless of all the statistics that you see, right, you do need to be attuned, right, as to whether that landscape, the legal landscape, provides for that opportunity, right? And I think the second cause of that mismatch that I've seen is sometimes the government's policies, on discrete areas might not always be, at least in the minds of the community, conducive with fostering digital transformation, right? And one of the examples that you mentioned was the law of cybersecurity, right? That was passed 3 years ago, right? It introduced data localization requirements. It introduced a requirement for certain overseas companies to set up a local office in the country. Yes. And the government rationalized this. They were saying that it was necessary to create a safer cyberspace, a safer internet environment. So businesses should prepare for some, dichotomy, between their views on what they believe is the correct way of achieving digital transformation versus the government's way of doing things, right? And I think one of the best ways to close that gap is through communication. Whether you do it individually or whether you do it through a collective, through your industry or business interest groups, there are opportunities to engage in dialogue with the government. At least in Vietnam, right? And they do listen. Right, policies in Vietnam, they can be, and they have been shaped because of that dialogue.
Could you share an example?
And, a good example, I think, is the law on cybersecurity itself. Right, at first blush, it looks draconian. You see localization, you see branch, you must set up in Vietnam, and maybe the mainstream media has probably played it a bit, in making this, making it a bit more dire than it looks. But that law, it was passed 3 years ago, right? And for those 3 years since the law on cybersecurity has been passed, we actually haven't seen active enforcement of those requirements. And that is because the government, right, they're trying to strike a balance, right? On the one side, they want to address legitimate socioeconomic objectives of addressing cybersecurity. But on the other side, right, they don't want to prejudice the advancements they are making towards digital transformation, right? So there is a balancing act. And, for those 3 years, they have their ears on the ground. They have been listening to businesses. They have been listening to industry groups, right? They're seeking to understand, where that balance can be made. So right now, as it stands, data localization, at least what you see on the news, it looks particularly dire. But on the ground now, I think it's still a matter of waiting to see, how the balance is going to be taken by the government.
Thanks, Logan. I think that's really where I wanted to eke out of you, just what it really is like, right? Because we've seen what we've seen in media, you heard, what people say, in terms of the think tank leaders, and some of the pain points in terms of commerce industries, commercial organizations trying to come together. But the fact that there are avenues where change can be achieved, where the policymakers do listen, I think is the key message that I think we should all take away. And this is no different for any of the other jurisdictions. Finding those avenues and channels may be hard, but the point being made is that it is a consultative exercise to a large extent. This being a new area, there's a lot of opportunity for us to work together and find those commonalities collectively, rather than just letting the regulators set the agenda in isolation. Which brings us nicely to the next point, in terms of Aisha and your inputs for today. I'm really looking forward to your thoughts on digital transformation. We've heard a lot about what ADO does in terms of helping organizations in that journey, the transformation exercise that we all have to undertake today. And some of the challenges that you have seen, in particular, transforming a company from, okay, I won't use the word traditional again, otherwise Chicken will get upset with me, incumbent companies have to deal with when it comes to pivoting from where they are to becoming a true, let's say, data-driven organization. What are the pain points that are there, and what should we look out for? Should these companies look out for in that digital transformation journey? Really appreciate your thoughts on those.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for having me on this panel. So basically, the most important thing that is critical when thinking about data-driven digital transformation is your data. So digital transformation 1.0 was when everyone was essentially trying to digitize their processes. But now we have the power of data analytics, foresight, insight, prediction, and all of that means that you can actually run a much better company if you have those insights. But the root of all of it comes from data. And traditionally what we have seen is that people don't understand. They tend to focus on the artificial intelligence, and
Right.
they don't appreciate that getting the data infrastructure right is so important. So a lot of what we do is what I call the data plumbing, which means getting that single source of truth. Because when you have a number of systems that they're like octopuses, it's an octopus with ever growing arms of different data, then it's hard to reconcile it. There's hard to make sense out of it. There's hard to get a 360-degree view of your customers or any of your processes. But once you get your data right, that makes your life a lot easier. So the first thing is getting your data right, put in the data infrastructure, ideally go to the cloud because it's secure and can do things very, very fast. And you can get set up very quickly with all kinds of data, which comes in different forms now. You have structured data, unstructured data, you have streaming data, you have batch data. And now that you've stored it all, start to organize it. And by the way, this takes place in a very agile way in 3-month kind of sprints. It doesn't need to all go in at the same time. Then the next thing is, well, what do I do with this data?
Yeah.
And this is when you just don't do data or AI for its own sake, but you're really trying to identify business use cases. And again, this is where the business comes in and says, these are the challenges I have. This is what my competitors are doing. This is where I want to go. What can I do with this? And the collaboration between tech and business as equal players in this innovation journey is very important. The old way used to be the business would come up with ideas and they would tell the techies who are in another building, especially in financial services, they used to be in another building somewhere else on another floor, and they would give requirements to them. But now it doesn't work that way. The CIOs, the chief digital officers, the chief technology officers sit in board meetings right next to the CEO. And more they say future CEOs are actually going to be present CTOs or CDOs. That's how important it is to pivoting your company to become data driven. So sitting together, identifying business use cases, and then testing them very iteratively in a very customer centric, measurable manner. That's the second thing that you need to do. And identifying and scoping the right problem statement for the AI is very, very critical. And then the last thing is, while you've got your data, you're using it for your business, how are you governing it? How are you making sure that it's in compliance with the laws, whether they're localization laws, privacy laws? We have new AI guidelines in Singapore. And what are you doing to make sure there is no bias in it, for example? Again, that there is semantic understanding of the data. Data governance is one of the biggest requests that we get now. There are very few experts in this. As every country is now changing its regulation, even different states in the US have different laws for data regulation. Managing that data in a way that's compliant, especially if it's moving cross-border, is extremely important and requires a set of tools, processes, and people. So all of these three things are very, very important. But underlying, what is the foundation of all this? It's actually not the data or the cloud or the AI. It's your human capital. It is literally all of the people that we're lucky enough to have in this country that with the right skills, future courses, AI Singapore courses, and other kinds of upskilling that the government provides and is subsidized for everybody, everyone is perfectly capable of joining these interdisciplinary teams where, yes, you have the business people, the design people, the project management people, the finance people, the AI people, you have the data people, and you have a new member, which is the AI engine itself, the AI machine, the AI robot.
Yeah.
And this is the 21st century team that can actually make our companies more competitive. And Singapore is in that situation where we have to become more competitive because the cost of AI is going down across the world. And we have many, many competitors everywhere. Luckily, we're not behind anyone, but we're not too far ahead of anyone either. And I think that is really the impetus for our companies to get their data in order, then for our people to change our mindsets, and then finally to become that trusted hub. Can we play that pivotal digital trusted hub for all companies and a trusted broker, a trusted data broker potentially in the long run.
Yeah. Absolutely. And thanks for sort of touching on that issue of digital trust. It was a point again that was raised quite a few times in the early session. In fact, it was the closing comment from Minister Chan as well about the importance of trust. And Singapore, in a sense, being in that place, has a strategic advantage, right, in terms of digital trust. But if I were to expand the discourse a bit broader to, let's say, across ASEAN, would there be specific pain points that you've seen in terms of an organization looking here at, let's say, collating data sets across the different jurisdictions, bringing it all together? What sort of issues or challenges that you've seen, from that cross-border standpoint? That'd be particularly helpful. Thank you.
I haven't seen anything or don't know of much that's happening in ASEAN, but I do know that there are great data brokers in the healthcare sector now in the US. And some of the things that they do, especially if they're international organizations or even if they're across states, is use new kinds of platforms like in country, where what you can do is that you can have your data, because for the AI to work, you need to have all the data available to it, but you can anonymize it, you can scrub it of privacy, you can scrub it of anything that a country or a state considers very importantly a national asset or a state asset or a citizen's asset. Right. So there are now new tools coming out. In California, when they had CCPA, which is even stricter than the European Union's GDPR law, they have, again, new tools coming out for that. So it's a combination of tools. It's also a combination of a data governance department that is not there. Right. And then these trusted brokers, I'm sure, will come out more in Asia as well.
Super, thanks. That's going to be something worth looking out for, the digital data brokers that we can all look at leveraging of in the region. Perhaps even a business opportunity for some out there who may be interested in understanding that a bit better. Thanks so much to all of you for your time. The questions have been coming in thick and fast, actually, a fair few of them that are here. Shall we perhaps look at those that were upvoted by the participants? I think there was one that had 3 ticks next to it. Perhaps we can start with that. Right, okay, that's a particularly interesting question. I think it cuts across areas that many of you have covered. The question is this: with growing data protection and localization laws due to national security concerns, particularly in China, how can Southeast Asia tackle these regulatory forces to build an integrated data infrastructure? So some of the experiences that Aisha, you had mentioned, in other jurisdictions may potentially be learning points for us here in ASEAN. I think that's really going to be refreshing. Same as well, in terms of Royce, your views on this, and perhaps Logan as well. Anyone wants to start chipping in on this particular question first before I point fingers? Royce, I know that you're itching to answer this one. Sure. Yes.
No, I can jump in quickly. I think the first point is to bear in mind that I think in a way a lot of the regulations are catching up to what a lot of companies, especially tech companies, are already doing. So to an extent, this greater regulatory scrutiny, this mushrooming of different data protection as well as cybersecurity laws requirements are not really unexpected. The issue always is that when governments come in to regulate, sometimes they may overshoot or they may overreact because they're going from, in a way, from one state of affairs and where there's very minimal regulation to another state of affairs, and the instinct then is to be as heavy-handed as possible, to be as harsh as possible. So I think this is an evolutionary process. I wouldn't think that the current state of affairs will be cast in stone. I like what Logan shared earlier about the need to collaborate, the need to work together, including or especially with the regulators. I like to think that the regulators, they're always well-intentioned. I think they always want to do the right thing, but at the same time, it's not an easy balance to strike in terms of what is the right degree of regulation. And that's where all of us really have a very important role to play. to provide our feedback, our consultation responses, and there are different ways of doing so, right? It can be via platforms like this, it can be via formal response to a regulatory consultation, or it can be behind the scenes, more low-key type of meeting. But the real intent really is that we spoke about trust, and this is how our tie-in trust as well, because ultimately regulators must be in a position to trust the companies as well. And to be fair to the regulators, the onus is really on companies to demonstrate why we are worthy of trust, right? So having gone through a number of years where the regulation might not be adequate, how can we then demonstrate that we are accountable for the data that we do have of our customers? What sort of safeguards do we have in place? What sort of purpose limitation are we pursuing? Similarly, especially for data transfers, how can we ensure that once data leaves the border of a country, the value that goes to the data doesn't then get lost to the country in question? So I think this is a fast-moving, fast-evolving area. All of us are equal stakeholders in this, and we all have much to gain by working together.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing your views on that. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Chicken, do you have something to say on that?
Yeah. So I don't think we will ever achieve an integrated data infrastructure. I think it's a pipe dream. So I think what we need to do is we need to lobby for harmonization. I love that word because it's not integration, it's harmonization.
Not again. Okay.
And I think that we need to design for fragmentation. I think it's inevitable that the local domestic socio-political considerations will intervene, even if you achieve whatever architecture you think you want to. With the passage of time, it will intervene. So the smarter response by organizations is to design for that fragmentation. And this will also ratchet with risk. You will get high-risk use cases where incredible amounts of scrubbing is necessary, but there are very, very low-risk cases as well that actually, if I just look at this very pragmatically, represent maybe 80% of the time. Yeah? So if you take a kind of an 80%, 20% type of rule, most of the stuff that you want to do probably doesn't have a type of a regulatory overlay. And then you got to deal with the outliers where your design skill will be put to the test in terms of the infrastructure that you use. Right. So that's what I think.
Yeah, thanks for that. Another reality check as well. I think the best would be a combination of both. We strive for a degree of harmonization to the extent possible, but at the same time, reality check that it's not going to be a perfect system. There will be defragmentation for political reasons and any other socio-economic reasons that countries may find for maintaining these walls. Thanks. That was a very insightful inputs. Thank you very much. Any other thoughts before I move on to the next question? Actually, let's move on to the next question. There's some here that I really can't wait to have answered. The first one that I have next is the issue of juxtaposition of sustainability and digitalization. So the question reads, another significant and related issue of concern in Southeast Asia today is sustainability. How would you view the correlation between digitalization and sustainability, if any? I think there are data and data points here that are of particular interest to me. I don't know if Aisha, you have any thoughts on this. How would a data-driven company, for example, be able to deal with this? Or Chicken? Yeah,
I think there are positive correlations and there are inverse correlations. Yeah. So positive correlation, digital banking serving unbanked segments. Yeah, fantastic use case. Direct correlation that, in a sense, you achieve a sustainability objective. Okay, sorry. Quite important to define sustainability as well, right? It's not just, climate. It's not just fossil fuels. Yeah, it's in a sense the ability of this generation to consume only those resources that this generation needs, right? Leaving enough resources for subsequent generations to consume what they need, right? So that's sustainability. And therefore, that would embrace things like water, gender, income, all those kinds of things, right? So basically, the United Nations definition of this topic. Okay, with that in mind, yes, there are positive correlations and there are inverse correlations. Here's an example of an inverse correlation, right? So the power usage of cryptocurrency mining, it's a standard thing that's trotted out now. So I think it does depend, looking at each situation that you are. But harnessing the power of what we know with data, with infrastructure, with next generation capabilities like analytics and artificial intelligence to drive sustainable goals. That's pretty cool.
Right.
And I think the companies that can jump onto that wave and then add, these two components to their strategy, I think they would be quite well set up strategically.
Thanks for that. I can certainly see the correlations. Aisha, would you like to add on to that in your perspectives as well in terms of data-driven companies rather?
Sorry, can you just repeat the question, please? I'm having a little bit difficulty.
Sure.
here.
Yeah. No. And the question really is about the juxtaposition of sustainability and digitalization. And so, would there be any sort of overlap between the two? And if so, if you could share some thoughts, how as part of the digitalization journey, sustainability aims or goals can be achieved for companies.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look, it's so important to be able to reduce your carbon footprint and to be able to do. I mean, my own PhD was in sustainable transportation for smart cities, and 100% of it was based on using artificial intelligence to optimize the usage of energy and the logistics and the reduce the usage of private car ownership. Of course, there has been at the same time some criticism of using data in terms of the fact that data centers themselves take up a lot of energy. And so you have new kinds of efforts such as Microsoft, where you actually have data centers that are underwater. So I think that we have to find the right kind of trade-off between these things. And Singapore is also looking very seriously about whether that we should have more data centers or not, precisely because of this reason. But that said, we do need to appreciate that the only way for us, especially this crazy climate change that we see everywhere, the only way for us to have a better grip on this and to be able to, in a more agile manner, address this, just like we had addressed the vaccine pandemics, is actually to use data and AI to think of and model what a more sustainable future looks like. And of course, for Singapore, with our green plan, everything from the way we make buildings to the way that we set up our infrastructure to the way we have autonomous cars to our food tech, all of it will heavily, heavily rely on data. So a sustainable future is not possible without using data and artificial intelligence. However, we should try to do it while reducing our energy footprint as much as possible.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for that, Aisha. And it's something that we've always tried to look at. This issue of using more computers means more increasing the carbon footprint. Ironically, the issue of AI is one that's juxtaposed these days a lot with what's going on in other areas like Bitcoin technology and DLT. And there's a general perception that technology is in fact agenda is not aligned with sustainability goals, because of the amount of compute power required, and that then extending to the amount of energy required to run these things. And there, I think a more holistic view by governments would be extremely helpful. What Singapore is trying to do, for example, in terms of pivoting towards solar, basically covering all of our reservoirs with solar panels, achieves two things: keeps the water cool and generates energy at the same time, which I thought was quite innovative. But these are again not new technologies. But as you mentioned before, it's about finding the right time for the technologies. And to the extent that such technologies help the countries and companies achieve their sustainability goals, there certainly are quite a few user journeys I think I can certainly think of just off the top of my head. So yes, definitely there is overlap and something that we must take into account. I want to move on to another question now, which moves away from policy issues to our own physical comfort and space. I particularly like this, and it has been upvoted, so I do want to ask it. The question is about the future of physical workspaces in Southeast Asia, where we are now. If you just look at this picture, this is such a different picture from any panel I would have held 2 or 3 years ago, where we'll all be in the same room effectively doing the session, or 1 or 2 persons from overseas, and there will be the chap who will be saying, "I can't hear you," and things like that. And yet we've had a reasonably seamless session thus far, being where we are. Some of us at home, some of us in the office, some of us, sometimes in cafes. So in that sort of environment and looking at digitalization, what is the future of physical workspaces in Southeast Asia with digitalization? Any thoughts on that front? How should your office be in a data-driven company where everybody can work anywhere, anytime? Anyone wants to take that? Logan, it's a great chance to restructure the office space in Vietnam.
Sure. No, I'm happy to speak briefly. I mean, we in Vietnam we've been working from home for a couple of months now, and it does take some time to get accustomed. I think it's really because this panic has really thrown a real spanner in the way we're doing things.
Yes.
But I think certainly with current technology, and with time, it does eventually, create an opportunity for us to be able to work, more efficiently, whereas, minimize also the physical space that we're occupying.
Yeah.
Right.
Thanks for that. We certainly see a lot of change. I think even within our firm, we're looking at restructuring the entire office to take into account the group work that needs to be done and dispensing with traditional workspaces. We were quite brave in getting rid of rooms for partners, which was in and of itself rather groundbreaking at that point in time. Hardly new these days. But there you go. I think it's very much work in progress. So thanks for that question in terms of a changing workspace environment. The last question is a broad one and one that I would love to get each of your thoughts on. The question is this: how do you view Southeast Asia's role in the wider Asian/global digital economy? What's ASEAN's role in that broader global economy? What are the cultural and or social political challenges that businesses in Southeast Asia may face in undergoing a digital transformation today? They're not necessarily, one after the other. I'm more interested actually in the first part of that question in terms of, where we see ourselves as ASEAN. Do we see this potentially as a launching pad of sorts? I know that the perspective will be very different for yourself, Royce. You are already a global company in a sense, and ASEAN would be more of a, let's have a strategy on penetrating this region. But even from that standpoint, right, looking at what has been achieved, is there a wider Asian global digital economy role for ASEAN as a bloc or as a group of countries? Any thoughts on that?
Sure. I do think that ASEAN presents immense opportunities. It accounts for why, and Alibaba is very bullish on the prospects for ASEAN, and there are multiple studies that have come out showing that there's a burgeoning middle class within ASEAN. It's a young, growing, digitally native population, and there's a lot of potential for further development, for the growth in ASEAN. So that really accounts for the great push that Ali is making to further embed ourselves within ASEAN and further grow and enable the businesses that we work with to also grow. So having said that, so we are very bullish. At the same time, there are also difficulties or challenges that we will need to overcome as a region. I think the first point really is to ensure that as a region, we remain open and we remain connected to both the Eastern and the Western tech ecosystems. We all know that there's intense competition or even rivalry that's ongoing. So for ASEAN to really remain relevant and competitive and dynamic, we really have to allow both ecosystems to be plugged in. So I look at it at two levels. I think at one level is really, I think at the comms, at the basic infrastructure level, I think we ought to have standards that are open, secure, interoperable. And then perhaps at the applications layer, that's where there's room for ASEAN to really come up with its own autochthonous kind of services that are designed to meet the needs of Southeast Asian economies. So I think that there's really a lot of, it's up to our imagination to see how we can push this forward, to have technology, and like what you said at the beginning, Rajesh, we're having technology that serves societies need to meet the needs of the people in ASEAN, rather than to pursue technology for the sake of technology alone. So I think there's tremendous potential for ASEAN and Southeast Asia.
Thanks. It's very heartening to hear from yourself on that point, Royce. Thank you. Anyone else would like to chip in on that question about ASEAN's role in terms of global digital transformation? What learnings here that could perhaps be transposed at a broader level? All good? Chikin, anything to add? The ASEAN perspective? Aisha?
Yeah, I suppose so. But I think if we kind of respect all the listeners' time, right? I think we're running this panel seriously over time. But I just wanted to maybe make one observation around the way I think we need to recognize the political limitations of ASEAN as a construct. I'm very, very conscious of the fact that it's a consensus-driven type of thing. I think the economic power of ASEAN does give it a voice and does put it in a position to perhaps represent a certain amount of Asia that I feel is quite an important counterbalance to narratives that may occur in Europe and may occur in the US.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a soapbox moment for me, but I feel personally very, very passionate about adding a voice of Asia to the international conversation and making sure that on very, very important issues, a perspective of what we can bring to the table is important. I think in this, I'm recognizing that India will always have a certain amount of limitation driven by social economic agenda. China will always have a certain amount of limitation driven by social economic agenda. So I guess there is a bit of a role here for a consensus-driven approach, or frankly, a thought leadership approach, maybe by the private sector, to take the conversation a bit further on very, very important things like artificial intelligence. And so just to build on this just a little bit, I think, for example, libertarianism in Europe, in particular, the focus on individual liberty, probably puts in a skew on public policy when you think about data protection and data privacy, which I think in Asia, because we believe so strongly in the value to the community, I think that perspective can help. Problem is, I think we're running out of time, so very, very difficult.
Yes, indeed. We could go on and on and on, and I do have to call an end to the panel, unfortunately, due to the constraints of time. So thank you all again. Again, it's my pleasure to be able to moderate this panel today, and thank you to each and every one of you. Thank you, Royce. Thank you, Chikin. Thank you, Aisha. Thank you, Logan, for your time and for your contributions to the panel today. We've learned a lot from everything that you've shared. And thank you all participating as well for spending your time with us. Have a great evening ahead, and thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Deborah. Thank you.